I walked into the house I built with my own two hands, only to hear my daughter say to her husband, "Don't argue in our house." Our house, my chest tightened. Every nail, every brick paid for with my sweat. Yet, in that moment, it was as if I never existed. I kept my face calm, but inside I thought, if they believe I'm too old to fight back, they don't know me at all. Because what they didn't see was the envelope I had hidden away papers that could change everything. Do you want to know what happened? When I finally put those papers on the table, stay with me until the end. And before we continue, comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story reaches. The sun was dipping low over Charlotte when I walked up the familiar path toward my daughter's house. The air was warm and heavy, the kind of southern summer evening that always reminded me of family barbecues and long talks on the porch. Stepping inside, I expected the comfort of familiarity. Instead, something felt different. Shoes I didn't recognize lined the entryway. Furniture had been rearranged, the walls decorated with prints I had never seen before. It wasn't my home anymore, though once, every corner of it had carried my touch. I set my bag down gently and let my eyes roam. The place had a polished look, almost as though it had been staged for someone else's eyes. A quiet unease pressed at me. Years of memories seemed to have been tucked away, erased. I moved toward the living room, heart tugged by the thought of one thing in particular, my late wife's armchair. That chair had carried her through long evenings, cradled her when she was weak. I had promised myself that no matter what, it would always remain in the family. But as I reached the spot where it should have been, my chest tightened. The chair was gone. In its place sat a sleek, modern couch, pristine and cold. For a long moment I just stood there, my hands frozen at my sides, the silence inside me louder than any shout. Grief rose sharp, unexpected, as though she had just been taken from me again. My daughter noticed my stare. "Oh, Dad," she said lightly, waving a hand as if brushing away a speck of dust. It just didn't fit the look anymore. We needed something fresh. Fresh. That word struck me like a slap. Memories were not old furniture. They were roots, anchors. My throat ached, but I swallowed the words I wanted to speak. Instead, I forced a nod, though inside, something small cracked. As the evening unfolded, the cracks deepened. Her husband barely acknowledged me. His greetings clipped, his attention fixed on his phone. When I tried to share small stories of the house, of years spent repairing its walls and paying its bills, the words seemed to fall flat in the air, ignored. My presence felt tolerated, not cherished. I sat at their table and listened, but in my chest, a slow burn of humiliation stirred. Later, the doorbell rang. Friends of theirs entered with cheerful voices, carrying a bottle of wine. My daughter smiled wide, her arm slipping proudly around her husband's waist. "Welcome to our new house," she declared. The words hit harder than I expected. My new house, our new house. I stood there, mute, while congratulations poured over them. None of these people knew that I had laid the foundation with my own hands, that I had spent decades ensuring every bill was paid. The smile on my face faltered, but no one noticed. Inside, bitterness coiled, wrapping itself tight around the edges of my heart. Eventually, I excused myself, stepping outside into the thick evening air. I let the silence of the porch steady me. The wood beneath my feet was familiar boards I had sanded, painted, repaired through countless summers. Yet now, it was claimed as theirs. As I leaned against the railing, a low murmur drifted from inside. My daughter's voice, hushed but clear enough soon. "It'll all be under our name." The words pierced me deeper than any act that day. For a moment, the night seemed to tilt. The discarded chair had been only the beginning. The morning sun slid through the blinds, streaking the room with lines of light that felt harsher than usual. Sleep hadn't come easy. The words I overheard the night before, my daughter whispering about the house becoming theirs, kept circling in my head like a restless bird. By the time I walked into the kitchen for breakfast, a strange stiffness filled the air. The clinking of dishes, the scrape of chairs, the forced politeness, it all felt rehearsed, like I was an extra in someone else's life. My granddaughter came running in, her small footsteps a rhythm that once brought comfort. She reached for me instinctively, her bright smile a spark in the gray morning. But before she could slide into my lap, my son-in-law stepped in, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "Go sit by your mom, honey," he said smoothly. The child obeyed, though her eyes darted back to me, puzzled. I swallowed the sting. A grandfather's arms had once been the safest place for her. Now, I was just another piece of furniture in the room there, but not meant to be touched. Later that morning, I tried again. She was playing quietly with her toys in the living room, and I crouched beside her, my knees groaning with the effort. "You know," I began softly, "when your dad was your age, I built him a swing out back. But I didn't get to finish." "Dad," my son-in-law cut in sharply, his voice holding a veneer of respect that couldn't mask the edge underneath. "We appreciate the stories, but let us handle raising her. Times are different now." The words sliced deeper than he knew. "Let us handle it." As if my decades of raising children, of loving, protecting, sacrificing, meant nothing more than outdated advice. My granddaughter looked between us, confused, her small hand clutching her toy tighter. I forced a smile, though every part of me recoiled at the humiliation. Inside, anger pressed against my ribs, demanding release. But years of swallowing pride had taught me how to bury it. I stayed silent, feeling myself shrink in a house I once filled with life. Needing air, I stepped outside. The porch creaked beneath my weight, just as it always had when I repaired it after storms. But the flower beds my late wife had tended were gone, replaced by neat rows of store-bought shrubs. The paint on the railings was fresh, erasing the marks of countless summers when my children had leaned there, laughing. Memories crowded in. My wife's laughter in the kitchen, the smell of Sunday dinners, the echo of children's voices running through halls. But piece by piece, those memories were being painted over, like my presence was nothing more than an inconvenience to be scrubbed away. Then it happened again. I paused by the window, hearing her voice float through from the other room. She was on the phone, her tone hushed but clear enough to slice through my chest. "Once the papers go through, this place will finally be mine. Not ours, not the family's, hers." My chest tightened as the truth took shape. This wasn't just about respect or influence. They weren't trying to push me to the side. They were planning to take the very roof I had built over their heads. Pain sharpened into suspicion, suspicion into quiet resolve. When I walked back in, she greeted me with a practiced smile. "Dad," she said lightly, "have you thought about, a retirement home? It might be easier for you." I returned the smile, though my jaw ached from holding it. On the outside, I was the picture of compliance, the gentle old man too weary to argue. But inside, a flame had been lit. They thought I was too old to fight back. Sleep never came easily that night. The whispers I had overheard at dinner replayed in my head, each word like a nail hammered deeper into my chest. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on a man's chest until he feels like he can't breathe. Every creak in the floor, every tick of the clock reminded me that I was no longer welcome in the place I had poured my life into. I reached for comfort, for something steady, my wife's photograph that always rested on the mantel. My hand froze in the dark when I realized the mantel looked bare, emptier than I remembered. By morning, sunlight slipped into the living room, revealing what I had feared. The mantel, once the center of our home, no longer held her picture. The frame with her smile, her eyes that had guided me through decades of hardship, was gone. My throat tightened. I asked my daughter where it was, trying to keep my voice calm. She didn't even look up from the coffee machine. It didn't match the decor. Dad, we're trying to keep things modern. Her husband leaned against the counter, smirking as if he had just witnessed a punchline to a cruel joke. My blood boiled, but I kept my face steady, no matter how hard I tried. Grief clawed its way into my chest. They had erased her, the woman who had given everything for this family, with a single careless decision. I swallowed the anger because I knew showing it would only please them. Later that morning, I walked into what had once been my study. The walls were painted a color I didn't recognize. The shelves filled with books I never bought. My chair, my desk, my smell of old paper and tobacco all gone. Still, a locked drawer in the corner remained, hidden under layers of new furniture. My fingers trembled as I pulled it open, half expecting it to be empty. Instead, the papers were still there: deeds, tax receipts, the documents with my name and my late wife's signature inked in steady black. Proof that this house was ours long before anyone else claimed it. My heart steadied for the first time in days. These papers, fragile as they were, became my anchor of hope. I tucked them back into the drawer, careful to make it look untouched. For the first time, I felt that I still had some ground to stand on. Memories washed over me. I saw my wife's face the day we signed the deeds, her hands trembling with pride as she held mine. I remembered the years of sweat working double shifts, fixing leaky roofs with my own hands, planting trees in the yard. Every inch of this place bore our sacrifices. Yet now, my own daughter spoke to me as if I was a tenant overstaying his welcome. The weight of betrayal pressed heavier than the grief of loss. That evening, as I passed the hallway, I caught the low murmur of voices. I stopped, leaning closer. My daughter's words sliced through me like glass. Once we clear out the rest, the paperwork will be seamless. Her husband grunted in agreement. My hands clenched tight around the folder I had slipped from the drawer earlier. Paper crackled under the force of my grip. They thought I was too old, too weak, too blind to notice. But I wasn't done yet. I retreated quietly to my room, a vow echoing in my chest. They could strip the walls, hide the photos, change the paint, but they would not erase me, not while I still had proof of what was mine. That night, I lay awake again, but not with despair. Resolve had taken its place. The battle for my home had only just begun. The dinner table that night felt more like a stage than a family gathering. The son-in-law, who usually barely muttered a word in my direction, was suddenly all politeness, offering me dishes I didn't ask for, asking questions that didn't need answering. My daughter kept her smile fixed, but her eyes darted back and forth between me and the thick folder resting by her side. I knew something was coming, and the food on my plate might as well have been ash in my mouth. When the plates were cleared, the moment arrived. With a practiced smile, my daughter slid the folder across the table toward me. "Dad," she began, her voice soft but rehearsed. "We've been thinking about what's best for you. You deserve peace, comfort, and no worries in your later years." I opened the folder. Retirement community brochures, glossy pages full of smiling seniors playing shuffleboard and painting by numbers. At the bottom, forms already prepared, lines where my signature was meant to go. They had dressed it up as concern, but I could see the truth. They wanted me gone, out of the house, out of their way. I didn't let my hands tremble as I closed the folder. My heart raced, but I made sure my voice was calm. "This isn't about comfort," I said quietly. "This is about getting rid of me." The son-in-law leaned back, smirk tugging at his lips. "Dad, times change. It's better for everyone if you're in a place that can take care of you properly." I locked eyes with him, refusing to blink. "I've taken care of myself longer than you've been alive," I said, "and I'm not about to sign away my home." The tension cracked like glass. My daughter's face flushed, her smile slipping. "You can't keep living like this," she snapped, frustration bubbling to the surface. "You're making it harder for us to manage things here." "Manage things," I repeated slowly. "This is my home." That was when the words came, sharp as a knife. "Don't argue with my husband in his house," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. The air went still. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I felt every year of my age pressing down on me. Those words cut deeper than the papers. Not just rejection erasure. My daughter had just denied every nail I hammered, every bill I paid, every sacrifice her mother and I made, and she had done it with one cruel sentence. Her husband seized the moment, leaning forward with a look of triumph. "Yes, our house, our rules." I couldn't trust myself to speak without unleashing the fury boiling inside. Instead, I pushed back my chair, stood slowly, and walked to the garage. My fists clenched so tight they ached in the quiet of that dim space. The vow formed clear as day. They thought they'd beaten me, that I would quietly fade into the background. But I wasn't signing my life away. Not now. Not ever. That night, silence was no longer an option. The night after the dinner argument lingered in silence, heavier than any words we had exchanged. My daughter barely looked my way, busying herself with the dishes as if the scrape of porcelain could drown out everything unsaid. Across the table, her husband sat tall, the smirk in his eyes loud enough for me to hear his victory. Something told me that what I had faced tonight was only the beginning. Later that evening, they approached me in the living room. My daughter, her voice rehearsed and too calm, said, "Dad, maybe you'd be more comfortable in the garage for now. It'll give us all a little space and privacy." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. The garage, the place I used to fix the old Buick, where I'd stacked tools, lawn mowers, and holiday boxes I resisted, my pride flaring up. "There's a perfectly good room right down the hall." Her husband cut in, tone slick. "That's reserved for our guests. Surely you don't want to take that from them." Their words pressed me like a vice, leaving no choice but humiliation. And so, for the first time in my life, I carried my pillow and blanket into the cold of my own garage. My belongings had already been shoved into cardboard boxes stacked against the walls, as though I were some tenant already halfway evicted, lying down on a cot they had dragged out for me. I stared at the bare rafters, their shadows reaching down like fingers. Shame burned through me, sharp and heavy. All I could think was, how did I become an intruder in the house I built with my own hands? The garage became both prison and refuge, surrounded by dusty boxes filled with pieces of my past. My wife's old Christmas decorations, faded baseball gloves from when my daughter was a child, blueprints of the renovations I once poured my heart into. I let grief press against me until it turned into something harder, a seed of resolve. If they thought this garage would break me, they were mistaken. The next morning, I stepped outside to tend the lawn. It was habit, something I'd always done to keep the place neat. As I pushed the mower, a neighbor strolled past with a wave. "Hey, good work there. How long you been doing their yard?" The words cut deep. But before I could correct him, my daughter appeared in the doorway. She laughed lightly, brushing the comment aside as though it was the most natural thing. Her husband joined in, saying, "He likes to keep busy. You know how it is." To them, I was no longer the man who raised this family, who built this home. I was the help, I bit my tongue until it nearly bled, swallowing my pride to keep from exploding right there on the lawn. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. That night, back in the garage, I closed the door behind me, the slam echoing in my chest like a vow. Surrounded by my boxes, I whispered to myself, "They think they've broken me, but in these walls, I will plan my return." The garage was still cold that morning, even though the Carolina summer sun had already begun to warm the air outside. Boxes leaned against one another like silent witnesses to everything I had built and everything they were stripping away. As I sorted through the piles, old photographs, bank records, utility bills, something gnawed at me. A few folders were lighter than they should have been. Papers I remembered placing there weeks ago were gone. A sharp unease coiled in my gut. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the knowledge that what I feared most was finally happening. They weren't just moving me into the margins, they were planning to erase me altogether. Later that afternoon, while my daughter and her husband busied themselves in the kitchen, I slipped back into the study box I'd rescued from storage. Tucked inside, beneath yellowed tax returns, lay a single sheet I didn't remember leaving behind. At first glance, it looked ordinary, legal, neat, stamped with the kind of weight that could change a life. Then my eyes froze on the signature line. It bore my name, but the slant, the curl at the end of the D, it wasn't mine. I had written my name thousands of times, signing checks, contracts, report cards, deeds. This was a stranger's hand, a stranger pretending to be me. The document was a power of attorney, granting control of finances and property to my daughter. To them. I stepped back, the walls spinning. My daughter must have seen me pale when she walked in. She glanced at the page in my hand, then laughed softly. "Dad, don't look so surprised. You probably don't remember signing it. You've been forgetful lately." Forgetful. The word cut sharper than the paper between my fingers. Behind her, her husband leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk plastered across his face. "You're getting older," he added coolly. "We're just trying to make things easier for you." The room rang with their voices, but my mind locked onto that fake signature, heavy and suffocating. They weren't helping me, they were pushing me out of my own life. That night, after they had gone upstairs, I picked up the phone and dialed an old number I hadn't called in years. "Harold," I said, when the line clicked alive. "Good Lord," came the gravelly reply. "Haven't heard from you in ages." "What's wrong?" Harold used to be my lawyer. Before he retired, we'd shared barbecues, fishing trips, funerals. More importantly, he had drawn up the very documents that made me the rightful owner of this house. I explained what I'd found. Silence stretched on the other end. Then Harold's voice dropped low. "Listen to me carefully. If they use that forged power of attorney, you could lose everything. They could sell your house right under your nose, and you wouldn't have a legal leg to stand on unless you act immediately." His warning thundered in my chest. "File a case," he urged. "Do it tomorrow. Don't give them a single inch." But as I hung up, a heavy ache pressed down. Could I really drag my daughter into court? Could I haul her into the same system I once trusted to protect our family? My heart begged for a shred of loyalty, a chance for her to turn back. I wanted to believe she was misled, pressured by that man she married. I wanted to believe she still loved her father. That weakness, the hope for redemption, kept my hand from dialing the courthouse the next morning. Instead, I tucked the forged document into my jacket pocket. That evening, over dinner, my daughter smiled sweetly. "Dad, you shouldn't worry about bills or upkeep anymore. From now on, we'll handle everything. You just rest." Her husband nodded, his smirk never wavering. "It's better this way." I clenched the paper in my pocket so tightly it crumpled. The taste of betrayal was sharp on my tongue, but I said nothing. When the house grew quiet, I whispered to the shadows of the garage, "They think I'm blind. But I see everything, and I will act." The whispers came first. They slid through the neighborhood like snakes in tall grass, quiet and venomous. I was sitting on the porch one afternoon, trying to catch some air after another tense morning in the garage, when I caught two women from down the block speaking in hushed voices. "Such a shame," one said. "He used to be so sharp." The other replied, "Now they say he forgets where he is sometimes." Their eyes darted toward me before quickly shifting away. My chest tightened, forgetful, unsafe. I knew exactly where those words had come from. For decades, I had been the man neighbors turned to for advice, the one who fixed a fence without being asked, who gave rides to church when cars broke down. Now, with a few lies planted by my own daughter and her husband, I was reduced to a caricature, a doddering old fool who couldn't be trusted with his own life. The pride I had once carried so easily now felt like a weight pressing me into that porch chair. The following Sunday, the poison spread further. At church, I noticed the way people avoided meeting my eyes. Normally, they'd greet me with firm handshakes and smiles. Instead, they offered me cautious nods, like one might give to someone unstable. I overheard the pastor gently asking my son-in-law if everything was all right at home, his voice loaded with pity. Then at the grocery store, I reached for a bag of flour only to feel a hand clap my shoulder. A woman I had known for years said quietly, "You're strong for still getting out." Bless you. Her pity burned worse than insult. I didn't need anyone's blessings. I needed my dignity. And I knew now exactly who was stealing it from me. The final blow that week came from my own blood. My daughter arranged a family gathering. Cousins and uncles crowded into the living room. I expected warmth. Instead, I found myself surrounded by polite concern that cut like knives. "He's not himself anymore," my daughter told them, her voice dripping with practiced worry. "He gets confused easily. I'm just trying to do what's best." My cousins nodded, some reluctantly, others eagerly. One even put a hand on my knee, urging, "Let her take the reins. Man, it'll be easier for you." I sat there in silence, my jaw tight, watching as my life was rewritten in real time by the very child I had once carried on my shoulders. Later that evening, I walked down the block to see my neighbor Henry, a man I'd known for 40 years. We had fixed roofs together, shared beers in the summer heat, and shoveled driveways side by side through bitter winters. I expected at least one soul to stand firm by me. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably when I asked if he'd heard the talk. "People are worried about you," he said softly, avoiding my eyes. "Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you should take it easy." That hesitation cut deeper than all the gossip. If Henry doubted me, it meant the web of lies had done its work. That night at dinner, the mask finally came off. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair, smirk curling on his lips. "He's not fit to live alone anymore," he declared, his voice steady, calculated. I turned my eyes toward my daughter, waiting for her to speak, to defend me, to correct him. But she sat silent, staring at her plate. Her silence was worse than betrayal, it was consent. Inside, my blood boiled, but my face remained stone. I looked at her, at the child I had raised, the woman who now stood complicit in tearing me down. If my own blood won't defend me, I'll defend myself. I pushed back my chair slowly, rising without a word. Inside, a promise was being forged harder than steel. I would not let their lies define me. If words couldn't save me, then proof would. The living room was crowded that afternoon, more than it had been in years. Cousins, uncles, and neighbors filled the chairs, sipping on sweet tea my daughter had set out. The atmosphere carried a false warmth, the kind you sense when people gather not to celebrate but to judge. I sat at the far end of the table, the weight of a dozen eyes pressing on me, and I knew something was about to unfold. My daughter stood tall beside her husband, their smiles rehearsed. She spoke first, her voice measured but sharp underneath. "Dad's been struggling. We've all noticed. It's time someone stepped up and made sure he's taken care of," her husband added with a tone dripping with condescension. "He's not able to manage things on his own anymore. We're just looking out for him." The words hung in the air, suffocating. I stayed silent, folding my hands together, letting them play their theater. My silence wasn't weakness. It was patience. When they pushed the folder toward me, my heart raced. I opened it slowly, already knowing what I would find. The forged power of attorney papers, my own signature crudely imitated. I raised them high for everyone to see, my voice steady but firm. "This," I said. "Letting the paper rustle is a lie. I never signed this, and the day I do will be the day I'm no longer breathing." Gasps echoed around the room. My son-in-law leaned forward, pretending calm. "You must have forgotten. We filled it out together. You wanted us to help." His smirk betrayed him, and I felt my blood burn hotter than any flame. The silence that followed was heavier than steel. No one expected me to fight back. Just as the tension peaked, the front door opened. Every head turned. My old friend, Mr. Harris, the retired lawyer I had trusted decades ago, walked in with his leather briefcase, his voice cut through the suffocating air. "I've reviewed the documents," he said, pulling out official papers stamped and notarized. "This signature is a forgery. And let me make something very clear, this man's mind is sharper than any of yours here today. He knows exactly what he's doing." A shockwave ran through the room. My daughter's face drained of color. Her husband's smirk twisted into something uglier. For the first time, they weren't in control. The mask cracked on my daughter's face. She shouted, her words wild and cutting. "You always put outsiders before your own family. You never trusted me." The bitterness in her voice revealed everything, her greed, her resentment, her intent. The room shifted. Cousins who had nodded along earlier now looked uneasy. Uncles whispered to each other, avoiding my eyes. Her outburst had pulled the curtain down on their performance, and everyone saw the naked truth. I kept my voice calm. "I trusted you with everything. But trust is not a weapon. You've turned it into one." Arguments erupted, voices overlapping, anger spilling over like a storm breaking loose. My daughter's husband slammed his hand on the table, insisting, "He's not capable of running things anymore. This is our house now." The lawyer set down his papers with finality. "Try that in court, and you'll lose." The room went quiet. I pressed my palms into the table, feeling its grain beneath my fingertips. My voice was steady, measured, but every word carried steel. "If you force me, I'll take this to court, and I won't be the one who walks away ashamed." The silence that followed was suffocating, heavier than any storm outside. Every face turned toward me, and for the first time, they saw not a frail old man but a fighter, a man unwilling to surrender. The silence that followed the storm in our living room still weighed heavy the next morning. The house was quiet, but not with peace quiet like an abandoned church, where voices once carried meaning but now only lingered as echoes. I sat on the edge of the bed in the garage, the smell of dust and oil filling my lungs, staring at the faint lines of sunlight cutting through the narrow window. Some of the grandchildren avoided me completely. They tiptoed past the garage door as if I were some stranger, an intruder they'd been warned about. Yet one little hand slipped a cookie into my lap before darting away. That tiny gesture carried more truth than all the speeches from the night before. I held onto it as proof that not every bond had been poisoned. By noon, the rifts in the family had cracked wide open. My son, James, showed up at the house, face tense, jaw tight. He stood between me and his sister, his voice firm. Dad doesn't deserve this. For a moment, it was as if someone had finally remembered who I was. But my daughter, my own flesh and blood, shook her head. Her husband's hand rested on her shoulder like an anchor. This isn't about respect. This is about responsibility. He can't handle things anymore. Arguments spread like fire through dry grass. Cousins whispered. Uncles raised their voices. The family tree splitting into jagged branches. By the time the sun dipped, even the church pews buzzed with whispers about our family tearing itself apart. It didn't stop at home. At the grocery store, eyes followed me, not with the warmth I'd known for decades, but with the soft pity reserved for the losing. A woman I'd once helped after her husband passed muttered to another, "Poor man. He's slipping." Their words clung to me like mud I couldn't wash off. At night, sitting in the garage, I clenched my fists. My mind was clear, sharper than it had been in years. They called me forgetful, unstable, lies, and yet lies travel faster than truth. My name, my dignity, were being buried under rumors my daughter and her husband had planted, but I would not allow them to write my ending. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. My late wife's cousin, Clara, knocked on the garage door. She was older now, her steps slow, but her eyes still carried that familiar fire. She sat beside me, lowering her voice. "I know what they're trying to do," she whispered, "and I won't let them succeed." From her purse, she pulled out a small folder. Inside were details of an account money I'd thought long gone, tucked away decades earlier by my wife before she passed. Clara had kept the secret, waiting for the day it might matter. Her testimony, her knowledge, could shift everything. For the first time in months, hope flickered like a candle in the dark. That Sunday, the family gathered again around the dinner table. The food lay untouched as voices clashed louder than the clinking of forks. My son-in-law leaned forward, his voice cutting. "He's done. He has no business holding on to anything." I didn't look at him. I locked eyes with my daughter. My voice came steady, low, unshaken. "You'll regret underestimating me." The room went silent, and then the phone rang. Everyone froze. James answered, his expression tightening as he listened. He handed me the receiver with a grave look. On the other end, a voice announced the unthinkable: a legal notice had been filed. When I put down the phone, I knew the battle was no longer private. The war for my home, my name, and my dignity was about to play out in the open. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, slipped through the slot like any other piece of mail. My hands trembled as I tore it open, but my eyes were steady as they scanned the black print across the page. A formal summons. My own daughter and her husband were dragging me into court. Betrayal has a sound. It's the silence that follows when you realize your blood has turned against you. My chest tightened, but somewhere under the sting, resolve began to form like steel. If this was the path they chose, I would walk it, even if I walked alone. The courthouse loomed tall and cold that morning, its stone walls rising like judgment itself. Inside, the air hummed with whispers. I felt eyes on me, some curious, some pitying, a few hostile. On one side of the benches sat my daughter and her husband, smug, surrounded by cousins they had convinced. On the other side, I sat alone, shoulders squared, carrying dignity as my only shield. The weight of decades pressed on me, every nail hammered into the house, every dollar earned for their future. And now this was my repayment. When the clerk called my name, I stood, my legs heavier than they had ever been, but steady. Then the betrayal unfolded before me like a knife turned slow. My youngest son, the one who once ran into my arms after scraped knees and broken hearts, took the stand. His voice carried the lies of others. My father, he forgets things. He's not safe to manage the house anymore. Each word cut deeper. My heart broke, but my face did not falter. The world would not see me collapse. The tide shifted when my ally arrived, my late wife's cousin, holding papers that glowed like lifelines in a storm. She handed them to the judge, an old letter and financial records proving manipulation by the son-in-law. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. My daughter's face drained of color. Her husband's smirk cracked into something brittle. Vindication burned through my veins. For the first time in months, I felt the truth lean in my direction. But the battle was not yet won. The judge's gavel slammed down, silencing the noise. His voice carried the weight of law. This case is too charged for a ruling today. We need more testimony, more proof. My fists unclenched as the air thickened with uncertainty. No victory yet. No peace yet. Just the promise of another round. As I stepped outside the courthouse, the sun felt sharper, hotter. People's eyes followed, some filled with hate, others with a quiet kind of support I had not expected. The fight was far from over, I whispered to myself. Steady as stone, this has just begun. The house felt different after the courtroom clash. Stepping inside, I expected some sense of relief, but instead, a heavy silence greeted me. Every corner seemed stripped of warmth, as though even the walls recoiled from me. The shadows stretched longer that evening, and the air felt thick with judgment. I noticed the mantel where my wife's photo once sat. The empty space tugged at my chest like a cruel reminder. The house that had once been our sanctuary now stood as a museum of betrayals, each corner echoing with the sacrifices we made and the life we once built. That night, rest wouldn't come. I wandered the hallway, listening to the creaks beneath my feet. Then, voices low but sharp slid through the crack of a door left ajar. My daughter's voice trembled with anger, accusing her husband of moving too slowly. We need him to sign everything. The longer he stays, the harder this becomes. My chest tightened, each word cutting deeper than the last. Her husband's voice followed, smooth, calculated. Don't worry, he's slipping already. Soon he won't remember what's his. I froze in the dark, their whispers wrapping around me like a noose. I leaned closer, heart pounding. They spoke of the estate, of me, like I was no longer flesh and blood, but an obstacle to be maneuvered. Then came the words that shattered the last thread of trust. If we contest her will, claim it was outdated, we can lock him out entirely. My late wife's will, the one she and I prepared together, her last testimony to the life we shared. Hearing them plot against it was like hearing them dig her grave twice. I pressed my hand against the wall, fighting the urge to storm in. My body burned with anger. Yet I stayed silent, each breath a war against my own fury. The next evening at dinner, the tension broke. My son, quiet for weeks, slammed his fork down. His voice cracked the air. You always favored her. You never saw me. Maybe this is what you deserve. His words hit harder than any blow. Betrayal didn't just wear the face of greed, it wore the mask of old wounds I never knew ran so deep. My daughter watched silently, her husband smirking at the storm he had fueled. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the table, not from weakness, but from the sheer force it took to hold back every word rising in my throat. Later, in the solitude of my study, I unfolded letters my wife had written before she passed notes about the home, about the family she hoped we'd preserve. Her handwriting steadied me. Her voice, faint but alive in those words, reminded me that I wasn't fighting just for myself. I whispered into the still air. They won't destroy what we built. I won't let them. For the first time in weeks, my chest eased, not with peace, but with resolve. Their whispers of betrayal had left me no choice. The next move would be mine. and it would be the one they never expected. The living room was too quiet that afternoon. A storm had been brewing for months, but this time I was the one who called the meeting. My children filed in with stiff faces, their spouses close behind. They expected me to surrender. Their eyes told me they believed this would be the day I let go of everything my wife and I built. I sat tall, letting the silence stretch. "Before we begin," I said calmly, "I want you all to hear me clearly. What we built here was never about walls or money. It was about sacrifice, duty, and love. And I won't see that sacrifice to greed." The son-in-law smirked, arms crossed. My daughter avoided my eyes. I took a slow breath, steadying the fire in my chest. When I placed the envelope on the table, the room shifted. A heavy, sealed package, untouched for years. My late wife's handwriting, still bold on the front. I slid it across, breaking the seal with deliberate care. Inside were notarized letters, and the will she and I had updated together, long before whispers of betrayal filled this house. Her words, written in her neat, looping script, declared what I had always known: the home, the land, and every piece of our legacy remained under my stewardship until my passing. No one else had claim to it. Gasps broke around the table. My daughter's face drained of color. The son-in-law leaned forward, voice shaking with anger. "This is manipulation," he made her write this. But the papers bore signatures, seals, dates, irrefutable. My wife's voice came alive through those pages, silencing the room. "You forget," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "This wasn't just my house. It was hers too." And she made sure her voice would never be erased. "The dam burst then," my daughter shouted, accusing me of putting outsiders before family. "You've always favored them over me, always." Her rage cracked the polite mask she had worn for months. The son-in-law pressed his hand on her arm, but the damage was done. Her bitterness poured out in front of everyone: brothers, cousins, even the grandchildren. My other son sat back in silence, shame on his face. His betrayal was still fresh, but now he saw the truth for what it was. I stood slowly, my palms steady on the table. "This is not about favoritism. This is about respect. Your mother and I built this family with sweat, tears, and endless sacrifices, and I will not let that be mocked by greed." Their words grew harsher, but I no longer heard them. My voice cut through the noise enough. Then came the twist they never saw coming. I revealed another document, smaller, newer, but just as powerful. Months ago, when I first suspected betrayal, I placed the property into a trust managed by our church's charity. The trust ensured the house would remain protected, used for community service after my death. The gasps this time turned into stunned silence. My daughter's husband slammed his fist on the table. "You gave it away." "No," I replied, voice like iron. "I preserved it. You can't touch it. Not now. Not ever." The truth hit them hard. Their schemes had collapsed. Everything they fought for slipped away, and there was nothing left to take. Their faces twisted in disbelief, their anger powerless against a decision already sealed and witnessed. "You thought you'd take everything," I said softly. "But you never understood what your mother and I truly left behind." That night, I sat alone in my study. The noise of arguments still echoed faintly down the hall, but in that small room, peace finally found me. I held the last letter my wife had written, the one she asked me to keep close for the day I needed strength. Her words reminded me of what mattered: that love and dignity outlasted money, and that family without respect was no family at all. I looked at her photograph on the desk. "We won. Love," I whispered. "They can't take what we built. Not anymore." Leaning back in the chair that had once been hers, I let the quiet wrap around me. The storm had passed. Justice was done. And as long as I breathed, her legacy and mine remained untouchable.